Okay, so today's conversation is on overcoming failure and rejection as a realtor, as a salesman, as a saleswoman, as a marketer, as a salesperson. Overcoming failure and rejection. Now, I'm going to take you through what failure and rejection is. When we talk about failure, failure is characterized by these attributes. Failure is characterized by depression. You have depression on one side, you have sadness on one side, you have pain, you have anger, stress, grief, doubt, tiredness, frustration, madness. Name them. When you have this feeling and thoughts about failure, that you have failed in something, you begin to entertain all of these characteristics or all of these other elements. But today's class is going to teach you how to turn this whole narrative into a favorable spot for yourself. Like we keep telling you, the lander's mindset and mind shift is about working on your mind. There are two ways or two wealth you can think of in this world: the tangible wealth and the intangible wealth. The tangible wealth are the things that you can see, the assets, the money, the cash, the investment, the land, the house, commercial assets, gold, diamond. The intangible wealth is the wealth that dwells in your mind, upstairs. And the one you have inside of you, which is in your mind, the intangible wealth, is the most superior wealth. Like it, hate it, or leave it. The intangible wealth is the most superior wealth, because the thought of gold, where did the thought of gold and the value placed on gold come from? It came from the mind. If your mind is not sound enough to identify that this thing is valuable, then it is not going to be as valuable as any other thing. So the mindset and mind shift by landers is geared towards working on your mind, because we believe that when your mind is sound, you can always create wealth. You can always own tangible wealth. You can always manifest tangible wealth. The wealth in you is the greater wealth. The wealth that dwells in your mind is the greater wealth. We keep asking these questions in any of our programs, or some of you might have heard this question from my partner, Mr. David. Where do you live? Where do you live? And the answer is, we live in our mind. We live first in our mind. The mind is the master. I wrote a book on the mega mind, Secret to Success. And in that book, I stated where the mind can make you overcome any kind of challenge, and the mind can set you up to win. When we talk about wealth creation, it begins from the mind. Whether you're getting training on financial literacy, whether you're getting training on investment, the whole wealth that you're thinking of dwells in the mind. So how you choose to utilize your knowledge of what your mind knows is in your hands. How you choose to convert that knowledge is in your hands. Those who understand this have gone ahead to convert this knowledge into wealth. The wealth that you see that are tangible are products of the wealth that exists in the mind. And one of those elements, or ninjas, energy vampires that can devour your mind, make you immobilize you, is failure, the thought of failure. So we are very objective about working on our mindsets, because we believe that a realtor who has a stable, motivated, inspired mindset can conquer every market challenge or marketing challenges out there. So when we say failure and rejection, these are energy vampires that can feed on the strength of your mind and immobilize you. But the good thing is that failure, anger, stress, depression, positivity, optimism, they are all built using the same source matter. They all come from the same matter: thought process. Your thought process can tilt towards the feeling of failure, backwardness, stress, anger, and your thought process can still tilt towards the side of positivity, optimism, growth, excellence, success. In today's conversation, we will accept the fact that there is something we call failure. We will accept the fact that there is a cost associated to failure as business people, as marketers, as realtors. But we will also see how we can turn that cost into gain. So our conversation today is how to turn the cost of failure into gain. Yes, failure exists, but there is something you can do about it. And it begins in your mind. It begins from your thought process. Let's continue. Now, what is failure? I'm sure if I ask all of us here, we'll probably have our own definition of failure. So I'm going to spare some minutes and ask us, Mr. Suleiman, what do you think about failure? What is failure to you? When we talk about failure, what is failure to you? You can type what you think failure is. Mr. Christian, you're welcome. What do you think failure is? What is failure to you, Mr. Christian? You can type it. You can send in the chat. Rena, hi. Rena, how you doing? What is failure to you? You can send it in as a message. Type in a message. What do you think failure is? What is failure to you? Now, from what I have here, failure is the social concept of not meeting a desirable or intended objective. When we set goals and objectives and we don't meet them, failure can be seen as that feeling of not meeting your intended goals and objective. So you've said, I'm going to do 10,000 feet or I'm going to do 10,000 steps today, and at the end of the day, you did 6,000. Our body interprets that to be what? Failure of an objective. There will be no failure if there's no timeline, if there's no measurement to set goals. So you can see failure to be the concept of not meeting a desirable objective. And it is usually viewed as the opposite of success. In our world, if you're not succeeding, you're failing. If you're not on the side of success, you're on the side of failure. So those who meet the objectives in the world or in any area that requires validation, they are seen to be a success. And for those who do not meet up with that objective or goal in their areas of endeavor, they are seen to be operating on the field of failure. So that is what failure is. It is just a social concept. When we say something is a social concept, it means it is what the society, it is what our social environment is forcing us to believe. I was having a conversation yesterday with somebody and I said, how did you even know you have challenges? Today, a lot of people's challenges are timed around, oh, I want to have my master's degree. I want to have my BSc. I want to have my ND or HND. I want to pay my school fees. School fees running into hundreds of thousands or millions. But in the days of our forefathers or the Stone Age, that was never their problem. They never saw failure as what we are seeing failure today. They had their own objectives, they had their own priorities, they had their own challenges in their time. So 1,500 years ago, people's challenges were not about going to school. People's challenges were not about buying cars. People's challenges were not about owning Bitcoin, foreign exchange, traveling abroad. Their challenge was about feeding their family. Their challenge was about increasing their yam ban, increasing their ownership of land. But today, our worries and what we attribute to failure has changed. If you don't have millions of followers on Instagram, you are now seen as a failure. If you don't have thousands of people who support you, you are a failure. If you don't have a car, you're seen as a failure. If you're not able to, buy certain things that meets up with societal standards, you're seen to be a failure. If you look at what I've just said, or you've listened to what I've just said, you'll see that all of these are just social concepts. Because in the days of my great-grandfather, they had no concern about numbers of followers on Facebook. So if it's not a social concept, it should have been fixed across the line, across the age. But from one age to another age, we have different characteristics or definition of what success and failure should be. So social concept, the failure itself is a social concept. And when it is a social concept, it means that you can tackle it. Because that is where we have more of our strength. People think that the more strength you have is on the physical. No. The strength that you have, the greatest assets that you have, is tied around the intangible assets that you have inside of you, your mind. Your mind has the greatest asset out. And that is why you can sit down in a spot thinking, and you're thinking utopic ideas, utopic thoughts. You can build castles in your mind. You can travel in your mind. You can live in your mind. You have imaginations inside of your mind. You can jump, you can fly in your mind. But can you do so in the physical? So failure is a social concept of not meeting a desirable or intended objective. And if this is how failure can be defined, it means you can deal with failure. Now, the criteria for failure depends on context, and it can be relative to a particular observer or belief system. So what it means is that there may be no generally acceptable characteristics that make somebody seem to be a failure other than what people force on you, the time where you live in, the environment where you live in, the people who live around you. Because I'm sure in a community where their strength comes from people who are hunters, failure cannot be seen the same way you have a community where people whose strength are drawn from the number of farm work that they can do. You cannot characterize failure of a monkey not being able to swim in a river, or a fish not being able to jump across trees. So failure itself has to do with criteria, opinions that are formed around people who are observing, around a belief system. Or if you don't have a G-Wagon, you're a failure. Or if you don't have clients who have done transactions for 1 billion, you're a failure. If you have not sold for the past 2 months, you're a failure. All of these definitions, they are coming from where? A belief system, and they are also coming from particular observers, those who are counting scores. So if you have people who are counting scores, if failure is attributed to a social belief, a social concept, then I think we can fix it. I think we can deal with it. Now, you see, one thing failure does is that it comes with fear. One of the baggages it comes packaged with is fear. And that is what leads us to the fear of failure. Because where there's an existence of failure, where there's a description of failure, where people have marked the line for failure, it leaves this thought of fear, the fear of it alone. And that is where we have the fear of failure. Now, the fear of failure, if left unchecked, can cause you to freeze and become